Labour puts tax top of its agenda, rolling out rises for all but the highest earners under a Corbyn government. But the Shadow Chancellor says those on £80,000 should be willing to pay more.
Do you know, I think all those people in the country, no matter what they earn, they want to see a decent society, and that's what we're appealing to them to do.
Also, the final two French presidential candidates cast their votes as the country decides. Free at last after 3 years being held captive by Boko Haram, 80 Nigerian schoolgirls arrived back in the country's capital. And Manchester United's Champions League ambitions come undone in 3 mad minutes at Arsenal.
This is ITV News with Kylie Pentelow.
Good evening. The Shadow Chancellor made tax a major issue ahead of the general election today by promising that rises under a Labour government would only affect the top 5% of earners. He wouldn't say exactly how much more they'd have to pay, only that it would be modest. It was an attempt to position Labour as the party of low and middle income workers, but opponents described it as a tax on aspiration from a group whose economic ideas didn't add up. Our political correspondent Paul Brand reports.
A warm welcome from party supporters isn't enough to win an election. So in the Shadow Chancellor's hand today, a pledge he hopes most voters will also applaud. A promise that under Labour, 95% of workers won't pay more tax.
If Labour is elected next month, we will guarantee for the next 5 years there will be no income tax rises for all those earning less than £80,000 a year. And there'll be no hikes in VAT and no changes in your national insurance either.
It is an attempt to defuse this bomb. Conservative posters claim Labour would hike taxes, but that risk now only applies to high earners.
£80,000 will sound like a hefty salary to lots of people out there, but there are teachers, there are nurses, there are GPs on that salary. Has Labour given up on their vote?
No, not at all.
And what kind of increase can they expect in their taxes?
When we publish our manifesto, we will identify the rate that we will be going for, the rates that we will be going for. It is about making sure our public services, like NHS, like education, are properly funded. Do you know, I think all those people in the country, no matter what they earn, they want to see a decent society, and that's what we're appealing to them to do.
And in the Labour marginal of Brentford and Isleworth today, there was a healthy majority for Labour in favour of tax hikes for higher earners.
Well, I'm one of them. So, again, I do think if you earn more money, you should pay more tax.
I think that's just about the right level to start an extra tax on people.
I think McDonald has described it as you're rich if you earn over that amount of money, and certainly in London, you're not.
Where's the money going to come from?
So far, the Conservatives won't say whether they'd raise tax, but today that didn't stop them criticising.
Increasing income tax in this way sends a very powerful signal that the Labour Party is anti-enterprise and anti-growth.
But Labour claims it's for the many, not the few, and their Shadow Chancellor thinks he's found the tax pledge to match that slogan.
So, Paul, Labour say that the details of these rises will be revealed in the manifesto, but is there any indication of just how much that might be?
Well, John McDonnell said today that the rise would be modest, but he wouldn't be any more specific than that. However, there were two interesting hints in his speech. One is that I think we should certainly expect Labour to pledge to raise the top rate of income tax, as they have done in the past, probably to 50 pence in every pound, maybe to more than that. Secondly, though, I think they will also pledge to introduce a new tax band between £80,000 and £150,000 a year. And I reckon potentially they're looking at taxing people at 40 to 45p in every pound there. More than anything, though, this was Labour retreating to its comfort zone today, shoring up its core vote. They were very much protecting the tax interests of Labour voters, but not necessarily going after Conservative ones. OK,
Paul Brand, thank you very much. Well, elsewhere on the election trail, Theresa May has announced plans to overhaul Britain's mental health policies if the Conservatives are elected. She's pledged to rip up the current Mental Health Act with plans to roll out new support schemes to every school and employ 10,000 more mental health staff in the NHS in the next 3 years. Well, meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron, has been taking part in a fun run. His party also pledged to protect state pensions by including a commitment to the triple lock system in their manifesto. It gives a guarantee that state pensions will rise in line with either inflation, average earnings, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest. The polls are about to close in the French presidential election, and tonight we'll discover whether a previously unelected investment banker or a far-right nationalist will become its next leader. Voters have been deciding between the centrist newcomer Emmanuel Macron and his opponent Marine Le Pen. Our Europe editor James Mates reports from Paris.
Nothing is inevitable when it comes to elections, but rarely in a two-horse race is someone fancied as strongly as Emmanuel Macron this time. He voted in the northern seaside town of Le Touquet this morning in what may be his last act as a private citizen. Every major party, bar one, is backing him for the presidency, largely out of fear of this woman, Marine Le Pen. Voting in her northern heartland, she'll do better today than any far-right candidate before her, but is still likely to be a long way from power. The French two-stage system was designed precisely to keep candidates from either extreme out of office, and once again it seems to be working. Neither of the major parties who've dominated French politics for more than half a century have candidates still in this race, and there are plenty in France unhappy at having to choose between these two. Several we spoke to are voting against Le Pen rather than for Macron.
I voted against Marine Le Pen and not for Macron. But it's the best of the two worst choices.
It's not my favorite choice, but I'm happy to vote.
It's against FN, so the Front National, so it's okay.
For this reason, the turnout and the margin of victory will be watched very closely today. Mr. Macron has an ambitious programme to reform a country that's proved notoriously resistant to change in the past. If he's to have any chance of getting that through, he'll have to convince the country he has an enthusiastic mandate from the French people, not just that he's the best of a bad lot. Without it, winning today may not be his last battle, nor even his hardest.
James, the polls close in just a few minutes. What sort of anticipation is there this evening?
You can imagine these are the last few minutes of what has been a year-long campaign. This is the courtyard of the Louvre Palace, where in this magnificent setting in front of the pyramid, thousands of Macron supporters are waiting for the result, which will probably be announced in just a few minutes' time, and for their hero, who they anticipate confidently will win, to come and address them later on this evening. The TV companies will produce their projection in a few minutes from an exit poll and from some early counting, normally very accurate, and we should be pretty clear who has won this one, assuming it is not extremely close. The turnout that I was talking about in the report there, well, the French Interior Ministry say it is significantly down on the last three elections, anything between 6 and 10%. So that abstention rate may well be a talking point, but whoever wins won't care. In a few minutes we'll know whether France has its youngest president since Napoleon Bonaparte or its first ever woman leader.
James Mates in Paris, thank you. More than 80 Chibok schoolgirls have arrived back in the Nigerian capital, Abuja, after being freed by the militant group who held them for 3 years. They were among a group of around 220 who were abducted by Boko Haram. 100 of them are still missing. Our Africa correspondent John Ray has the latest.
These batch of girls were released yesterday.
Liberty at last, though their childhood and innocence have been lost forever. This, the largest group yet of Chibok girls to be freed, will bring joy and relief for their parents, prolonged misery for others whose daughters are still missing. Before any family reunions, medical tests, after a deal that saw Boko Haram prisoners released in exchange.
It's entirely government-led. We are on standby through our existing program for children who have been released from or escaped Boko Haram to support the government in the type of specialized services that these girls need.
In captivity, many of the girls, overwhelmingly Christian, have been forced to marry and bear children by their militant captors who pledge allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. Others, it is feared, were used as suicide bombers.
In these girls, Barack and I see our own daughters.
A high-profile campaign at least ensured that the name Chibok endured. Thousands more have been kidnapped and largely forgotten. Boko Haram's long war against the Nigerian state has claimed 20,000 lives and displaced millions. It is in retreat but remains a brutal force. Human rights groups say the girls, unlike others released last year, should be swiftly returned to their families. 113 of their former classmates remain unaccounted for. John Ray, ITV News, Africa.
Britain has more billionaires than ever before, despite fears over Brexit. That's according to the Sunday Times Rich List. Adele was the wealthiest musician in the UK for the second year in a row. This year, the wealthiest 1,000 people have a record total wealth of £658 billion, which is up 14% on last year. Football, and Arsenal boosted their chances of qualifying for the Champions League with a 2-0 win over rivals Manchester United. Arsene Wenger's first ever league win against Jose Mourinho, along with Liverpool's goalless draw against Southampton, means a top 4 finish remains possible for Arsenal. Rob Jones was watching.
Jose Mourinho once referred to his Arsenal counterpart Arsene Wenger as a specialist in failure. Now, both of their teams are looking at the considerable disappointment of missing out on the Champions League. Arsenal created chances in the first half both for themselves and United. Rob Holding's poor back pass almost allowed Wayne Rooney to score. A let-off there and some good fortune with the opener. A huge deflection helped Granit Xhaka's shot loop in.
Stunning strike!
Arsenal's second, 3 minutes later, came from Danny Welbeck.
Scores against his old club!
Their top 4 hopes revived, United's perhaps relying on winning the Europa League, and Liverpool continuing to squander opportunities to cement their place too. The latest one, against Southampton, came from the penalty spot and a debatable handball from Jack Stevens. It takes a lot to make James Milner miscue, but whatever Fraser Forster said, worked. The first penalties missed since 2009 that may prove costly for Liverpool's Champions League hopes. Rob Jones, ITV News.
And that's all for now. The national weather forecast is coming up next. I'll be back with the late news at 10 o'clock. Until then, whatever you're doing, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye for now.